Welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. In the midst of escalating conflict and rampant displacement between the border region of Sudan and Southern Sudan faces triple threats of war, hunger, and mass movement of people. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack this complex situation is Atefeh Moghimi, head of programs at Polish Humanitarian Action, with extensive operational experience in Southern Sudan's hardest hit countries and now engaged in response to Sudan's rapidly deteriorating crisis. She brings us frontline insight into urgent humanitarian needs and how aid is adapting. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So can you help us fill us in with the current situation within Sudan? What are some of the key developments in the country and some of the main humanitarian challenges you're facing right now?
Sure. So the situation currently in Sudan actually remains extremely concerning, and the conflict actually continues to spread all over. And what we see currently is that a combination of the needs that are like the active fighting that is happening and the economic collapse that is happening and the breakdown of the essential services. So millions of people are displaced inside Sudan, and many are living with limited services, limited access to food, to clean water, and to healthcare and protection. And the humanitarian challenges are now differing actually across the region because, for example, Darfur and Kordofan and the border areas in region are among the most affected, where actually the insecurity and restricted access, the movement, make it much more difficult for the aid workers to reach people in need.
Right, and with the actions of the Polish Humanitarian Action Group, what are some of the core activity that's taking place there, and face any operational challenges when carrying out these type of aids?
So currently at this stage, PH has a very strong operational presence in South Sudan, and where we conduct multi-sectoral assistances for water, food, shelter, protection. And in terms of the country of Sudan, we are not currently running a direct large-scale response there as a lead agency, but however, we are continuously monitoring from South Sudan. And if there is any influx or any affection by Sudan to South Sudan, we are currently supporting that. And technically it's much better. Yeah, over to you.
No, please continue. But just really curious because we're seeing these footages coming out, and it does seem like the situation is dire over there. I'm very curious if you have any first-hand witnesses during your mission and anything that particularly kind of stand out to you.
So technically, we are just at this stage monitoring the essential needs that are happening there, like safe drinking water, food assistance, emergency shelter, and the most important is the community resilience. How can we support it? Currently, there are many partners and humanitarian partners on the ground. However, the best approach would be through the local partners and the community structures to ensure that the assistance that everyone is providing is delivered efficiently and is actually adapted to the local needs that are on the ground. And operating across different regions come with very, very unique challenges. And from the access restrictions to bureaucratic delays, I should add. But we still, as humanitarian partners, continue to deliver the life-saving assistance that really needs on the ground.
Right, you mentioned like regional differences and different parts of Sudan has different type of humanitarian needs. How do these needs kind of vary depending on location to location?
So during these needs that are on the ground, especially maybe I can add that remote, hard to reach areas that we have in the region, especially we see that the communities are really struggling and coping with the impact of this prolonged conflict that is happening there. So people often walk long distances to find safety, to find water, and especially medical services. And needs are actually vary greatly in some areas. And the priority that is given is to food, it's to shelter, and in some areas that there is no hygiene, sanitation, or water, I would say, or the protection services. But as I mentioned before, the most important issue is the movement that is very difficult, and people have to walk most of the time to find the services. But what remains consistent, as my understanding, is people's resilience. And despite everything, they really continue to rebuild and support one another.
All right, the topic of movement also brings us to the large-scale displacement that we're seeing right now. Can you help us paint a picture of the current situation at the border and how that is impacting these movement of people?
Sure. I mean, at the border points, the border entry points, like now from South Sudan, I would talk about Upper Nile, which is actually the border with Sudan. And the entry points like Reng or Joda or the transit locations, transit centers, we continue to see a very high number of people crossing, mainly women, children, people with elderly people and people with disabilities. And mainly when they arrive, they are super exhausted. They are without any belongings, and they are just in urgent need for water, for food, sanitation, and medical assistance, and mostly for women and children. They are needing for protection. And the risks are very high, especially at the entry points. Malnutrition and disease outbreaks are really huge, and family separation is happening, and exposure to violence is something that we have seen a lot. And currently, PAH supports these populations by working closely with local authorities and humanitarian partners on the ground on both sides of the border. And we provide, for example, water supply, hygiene kits, emergency shelter, and support to community structures that help everyone.
Right. It seems like a lot of humanitarian aid is needed in that area, but I can't imagine like this going down very easily. What are some of the challenges when it comes to these humanitarian operations? Is there some issues with access, logistic? Seeing that the instability of situation over there, how do you guys go about coordinating all of this?
As you mentioned, access is one of the biggest challenges that currently we are experiencing. And the other one I would add is insecurity and the road situation, the damaged roads and flooded areas and administrative constraints that we have often really slow down the work that everyone is doing. So logistic is super difficult, especially when delivering assistance across the border, across the long distances. You can imagine that from one area to another area is about 8 hours. So all this in areas, this infrastructure that has been destroyed. And despite all of this, I would still add that Polish Humanitarian Action, or PH, have been able to implement successful projects. And we have really restored the water system, delivered food assistance, and supported the displacement that is happening on the sites. And also we are trying to, through the local authorities and through the different local stakeholders, to strengthen the local emergency response mechanism.
Right, like I mentioned, despite these challenges, PH has made leaps and bounds when it comes to actually helping out the people over there. And we do know that the PH is also being supported by the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. Can you help us understand how the MFA is supporting PH and enabling the operation to take place over there?
Sure. I mean, I would add that every support or every type of aid really matters at this stage. However, when it comes to MFA or the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, support from them has been essential and is still essential. This funding actually allows PAH to respond rapidly, to respond especially in the first days of a crisis. And it's really strengthening our ability to reach vulnerable communities, to the most vulnerable communities, and maintain our operational presence in the area, which is not very an easy job, I would add. And also it will fill the critical gaps that we are experiencing in the funding issues that we are experiencing now around the world. And these funding cuts through this MFA has been really helping PAH. And I would also add that thanks to MFA, we've been really able to deliver the concrete and life-saving assistances. And from the very clean water system to emergency food support, benefiting thousands of people.
All right. Now, we have a little bit of time, and I would like to kind of look into some of the future outlook as well as the PHAH's priorities. What are some of the needs that's expected to surface in, let's say, next half a year to a year?
I mean, in the next 6 to 12 months, humanitarian needs will likely continue to rise, definitely. And we expect more displacement, higher food insecurity, and also increased pressure on already fragile local systems, and especially in the border local areas, the border areas that I mentioned. So I would say that we would still prioritize as PAH to expand the water and sanitation services, also strengthening the food assistance and improving the shelter and protection, and supporting local host communities who really share their limited resources with the new arrivals. And this is something that we shouldn't forget, that when the influx happens from Sudan to South Sudan, still the host community, which still they are suffering themselves, they are still sharing their very limited resources with the coming people, with the new arrivals. And also we need to improve the access. We really ensure that with the predictable funding situation, we are still enhancing the coordination. It's going to be very critical still to help the communities to regain their sustainability.
Right, the situation does sound pretty dire over there. Thank you so much for your work, and really appreciate you being here with us on TVP World. Cheers.
Thank you so much for having me and the opportunity.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.